The clock had just struck 9 on a crisp autumn evening in Chicago when the unthinkable happened. Ethan Whitmore, a billionaire husband known for his staggering wealth, high-profile philanthropy, and a lifestyle so extravagant that even the tabloids struggled to keep up, wasn't at home with his pregnant wife, Claire. Instead, he sat in the dimly lit corner of Vellagio, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, waiting for someone who wasn't wearing his wedding ring. A single phone call would soon set off a storm of betrayal, shocking revelations, and the ultimate test of loyalty. Ethan Whitmore wasn't just another self-made mogul. He carried an air of power, wealth, and prestige that few could rival. Born into old money, he had spent his childhood between his family's Manhattan penthouse and elite prep schools in New England. Though he had inherited the Whitmore fortune, built on real estate and technology investments, his success wasn't merely a byproduct of legacy. He had carved his own path, leading his empire into emerging global markets and forging partnerships with the biggest names in Silicon Valley. The world saw a billionaire husband with a picture-perfect life, an empire spanning luxury properties, elite business ventures, and an enviable social circle. Behind the polished facade, however, lay secrets even his closest associates never glimpsed. His penthouse, perched above Lake Michigan, was rumored to house a priceless art collection, including rare pieces by Warhol and Monet. Invitations to his holiday galas were nearly impossible to obtain. CEOs, Hollywood elites, and even foreign dignitaries vied for a coveted spot on his guest list. But despite the opulence, it was his philanthropy that made headlines. Ethan had donated millions to medical research, funded scholarships for disadvantaged students, and was rumored to be launching a chain of pediatric clinics across the country. Standing by his side through it all was his wife, Claire Lawson Whitmore. Claire, a Boston native and dedicated humanitarian, had met Ethan at a charity gala in the Hamptons. With a quiet confidence and an elegance that needed no embellishment, she had built a name for herself as a global youth ambassador. An accomplished pianist and advocate for underprivileged communities, she was everything society expected from the wife of a billionaire. When they first met, their chemistry had been electric, a whirlwind romance that captivated the media. The press adored the story. Two idealists, bonded by their love for philanthropy, falling in love in a fairy tale wedding. Now, 6 months pregnant, Claire still carried that glow of excitement, but it was tinged with loneliness. Lately, Ethan had become more distant, buried under meetings and secretive business trips. She told herself it was just the cost of success, but in her heart, she feared there was more he wasn't telling her. And tonight, in a secluded restaurant miles away from home, Ethan was proving her suspicions right. The city lights flickered through the glass windows, casting long shadows across the penthouse. Claire sat alone on the couch, cradling her belly, her fingers unconsciously tracing slow circles over the fabric of her dress. 6 months along, she should have felt nothing but joy. Instead, an unease curled around her chest, tightening like a slow-moving storm. Ethan had been distant lately. At first, she told herself it was just business. His empire had grown too large, his responsibilities overwhelming. But a billionaire husband who once moved mountains for her now seemed like a ghost in his own home. His touch had become rare, his words clipped and his presence almost non-existent. The sound of a door shutting broke the silence. Claire's breath caught. Ethan wasn't supposed to be home yet. She hesitated before rising, her heartbeat picking up as she moved toward the hallway. As she got closer, she heard the low murmur of his voice. She paused. "You know I can't talk right now." His tone was sharp, urgent. "I told you I'll handle it. Just give me time." A long silence followed, then a quiet sigh. Claire stepped forward. Ethan stiffened when he saw her, his phone already tucked away in his pocket. His face betrayed nothing, but she saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something unreadable. "You're home early," she said softly, keeping her voice even. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, meeting got cut short." The lie was effortless. Claire wanted to believe him. She had spent years trusting Ethan without hesitation, believing that their love was strong enough to withstand anything. But trust without proof was nothing more than blind hope. The next morning she met Jenna Carter for coffee. The cafe was warm, filled with the comforting hum of conversations and the scent of roasted beans, but Claire's hands were cold around her cup. "He's different, Jenna." The words came out before she could stop them. Jenna, always the rational one, set her cup down with a sigh. "Claire, Ethan's under pressure. You know how much is riding on Whitmore Enterprises right now?" Claire swallowed. "But it's not just work, it's something else. I feel it." Jenna studied her for a moment before speaking. "If something's wrong, you'll figure it out. You're stronger than you think." But strength didn't ease doubt. That night, as Claire lay in bed beside Ethan, feeling the emptiness between them, she realized something chilling. She wasn't afraid of losing him to his work. She was afraid she had already lost him to something, or someone, else. The morning air was sharp with winter's bite, the sky above Chicago a dull, muted gray. Claire pulled Ethan's coat from the hallway closet, her fingers brushing over the expensive cashmere fabric. It was heavier than usual. Frowning, she reached into the pocket and felt something, crumpled paper, thin and smooth between her fingertips. She pulled it out, a receipt. Her stomach clenched as she unfolded it. Vellagio, a restaurant she had never heard of. A Michelin-starred spot, discreet and exclusive. The total was enough to make her breath hitch. This was no business lunch, but it was the date that sent ice through her veins. Thursday. Last Thursday. The night Ethan had sworn he was in New York, taking a late flight to a tech conference in Seattle. The weight of realization pressed against her ribs, thick and suffocating. Rational thoughts tried to fight their way in. Maybe he had changed plans last minute. Maybe it was a business meeting. Maybe. But the truth settled deeper, wrapping around her like a vice. If he had lied about this, what else had he lied about? Claire folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into her cardigan pocket. She wouldn't confront him now. No, she would wait. That evening, she sat on their plush sofa, the city skyline glittering beyond the glass walls. Her hands were steady, her expression calm. But inside, everything was unraveling. Ethan walked in, his shoulders tense, the exhaustion of a man balancing too many secrets etched into the lines of his face. "Long day?" she asked, her voice softer than she felt. He nodded. "Meetings ran late." Claire reached into her pocket and held up the receipt. "This was in your coat." She met his gaze. "You told me you were in Seattle that night." A flicker of hesitation. Then, too casual. "Oh, that? My flight got canceled. I ended up back in Chicago and had dinner with a client. Must have forgotten to mention it." Too easy. Too smooth. Claire studied him, searching for cracks in the polished facade he wore so effortlessly. His eyes darted for half a second. Just enough to betray him. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to dismiss the gnawing feeling clawing at her chest. But doubt had a way of sinking in, of making a home where trust once lived. Later, as she wandered through a boutique in the city, an all-too-familiar voice stopped her. "Claire, darling." She turned. Jenna's old acquaintance, Victoria Langley, the type of woman who always knew everything about everyone. "You look stunning." "But," Victoria lowered her voice, her lips curving with curiosity, "are you sure you're doing okay? Because I've heard things." Claire's fingers tightened around the strap of her handbag, her breath steady as she processed Victoria's words. "I've heard some things." It was a harmless phrase on the surface, but it sank into her mind like a stone thrown into still water. She forced a polite smile, though she could feel the tremor in her voice. "I'm wonderful, thank you. Just counting down the weeks until the baby arrives." Victoria's eyes glimmered with something unreadable. "That's wonderful to hear." They exchanged the usual pleasantries, but just as Claire turned to leave, Victoria leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Are you sure you're all right?" Claire stiffened. "What do you mean?" Victoria gave a delicate shrug, twirling a diamond bracelet around her wrist. "Oh, nothing. Just, you know how this city is. People talk." She exhaled dramatically. "If I were you, I'd keep an eye on your billionaire husband. He's been seen out with an acquaintance, but it's likely just business." A tight smile, a gracious nod. And then, just like that, Victoria was gone. But her words stayed. Claire barely remembered the elevator ride down to the parking garage. Her thoughts raced, colliding against each other in a blur of fragmented memories. Ethan's late nights, the distant look in his eyes, the receipt, the way he lied so effortlessly. Could it really be nothing? Or had she spent too long convincing herself there was nothing to worry about? She sat in her car for several minutes, fingers gripping the steering wheel as she took slow, measured breaths. The logical part of her mind tried to rationalize. Ethan had always been a public figure. People speculated. Rumors spread easily in their world, but a quiet voice inside her whispered otherwise. And she could no longer ignore it. That night, as Ethan kissed her forehead before heading to bed, Claire made a decision. She could ask again. She'd demand answers. But words meant nothing if they could be so easily manipulated. She needed the truth. Undeniable, irrefutable truth. The next morning, she reached out to Logan Hayes, a discreet private investigator she had overheard mentioned at one of Ethan's business events. If there was anyone who could find the truth without stirring a scandal, it was him. They met in a quiet corner of a small downtown cafe. Logan, a sharp-eyed man in his early 50s, studied her with quiet understanding. He had no illusions about why she was there. "This will be handled with complete confidentiality," he assured her, voice calm and measured. "We'll track his movements, gather necessary evidence, and report only to you, no one else." Claire swallowed, her throat tight. "I just need clarity." And for the first time in weeks, she felt one step closer to it. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her phone resting face up beside her. The screen dimmed, hiding the last message from Logan Hayes, but she didn't need to read it again. "He's at Vellagio. Not alone." She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the cool surface of the marble countertop. Her heart felt like it was being wrung dry, a slow, unbearable squeeze. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen. The image appeared. Ethan, seated at a private booth, leaning in toward a woman in a form-fitting red dress. The soft lighting made the setting look intimate. Too intimate. Claire's breath hitched. The woman's back was turned to the camera, but there was something in the way she tilted her head, the way Ethan's fingers rested on the table, dangerously close to hers. Her stomach twisted as she scrolled to the next message. They left together. Waldorf Astoria. Checked into a private floor. She swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Logan sent the final image, her breath stopped. The woman's face, delicate features, sultry green eyes. Claire's world blurred at the edges. She had always believed, despite the doubt creeping in, that Ethan would never cross that line. He was distant, distracted, but he wasn't this man. Not the kind who would betray her while she carried his child. And yet, here was the proof, unshakable, unforgiving. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her grief should have drowned her. But instead, something else surfaced, cold, sharp, and unyielding. She deserved answers, and if Ethan wouldn't give them to her, she would tear through every lie until she found them herself. 2 days later, she walked into his study, gripping her phone so tightly her nails dug into her palm. Ethan looked up from his desk, a hint of surprise flashing across his face. "Claire?" She didn't hesitate. She placed the phone on the table between them, the images still visible on the screen. "I know?" For a second, Ethan didn't move. Then his gaze flickered to the screen. Guilt, raw and undeniable, flickered across his face. But just as quickly, it was gone. He straightened, his expression smoothing over into the same charm that had fooled the world for years. "It's not what it looks like." Claire let out a slow breath, and for the first time she realized. She wasn't searching for an explanation. She was waiting to see how well he could lie. Claire's vision blurred as she struggled to breathe, her pulse pounding in her ears. She had spent days preparing for this moment, rehearsing every possible scenario, but nothing had braced her for the way Ethan's expression wavered between guilt and desperation. "Let me explain." His voice was low, careful. She forced herself to stand still, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Go ahead." The words barely escaped her lips. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Her name is Vanessa Sinclair. She's not my mistress. She's a client, a high-stakes investor. Her family controls a private equity group in Europe, and we're in negotiations for a major partnership." Claire flinched. The explanation was too polished, too rehearsed. "And that requires a hotel suite?" Her voice cracked. "Do you think I'm a fool?" His jaw tensed. "I won't lie, I let things get out of hand, but it wasn't like that." He hesitated, then added, "Vanessa insisted on privacy. Her father is ill, and she's about to inherit the firm. If news got out that she was negotiating with Whitmore Enterprises, the markets would spiral." The words should have made sense. Ethan was a powerful man, his business tangled in complicated negotiations, NDA-protected deals, and high-profile secrecy. But no amount of logic could erase the image of him slipping into a hotel with another woman. She swallowed against the burning lump in her throat. "Were you intimate with her?" Silence. Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor, his breath coming unevenly. And that was the only answer she needed. A sharp, gut-wrenching pain ripped through her like a tide. The betrayal too large, too consuming to contain. The man who had once promised her the world had let another woman into his. "I ended it." His voice barely carried across the room. "I swear to you, Claire, I got caught up, but I couldn't go through with it. I hate myself for it." She stared at him, trying to find a shred of truth she could hold on to. But every piece of him now felt foreign, distant. "I need space," she whispered. "I can't even look at you right now." Ethan didn't argue. He only nodded, his expression composed, but his eyes heavy with something she couldn't name. That night, Claire packed a bag, not to leave forever, not yet. But the walls of their home felt too confining, too tainted by lies. By morning, she had made her decision. She would stay at the Whitmore family's beach house. Away from the city, away from the weight of a billionaire husband's betrayal. She needed to breathe, and she needed to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. The waves crashed gently against the shore, a rhythmic lullaby that should have been soothing. But as Claire stood by the window of the Whitmore family's beach house, the ocean's vastness only deepened the hollowness inside her. The days had blurred together since she left. Ethan had ensured she had everything: fresh groceries, medical support, even new maternity wear. On the surface, she lacked nothing. Except peace. Each night, she lay awake, feeling the baby's movements, wondering if a billionaire husband's betrayal was something she could ever recover from. Her phone vibrated, breaking her thoughts. "Logan Hayes, I found something. Call me when you can." Claire's fingers hesitated before dialing. Logan's voice was steady, professional, but what he told her sent a chill down her spine. Vanessa Sinclair wasn't just an investor. She had a history of entangling herself with powerful men, securing deals through charm, and leaving them entangled in scandal. There were whispers of high-profile executives in Europe who had fallen into financial ruin after crossing paths with her. But that wasn't the most alarming part. She was linked to a man named Richard Castello, a financier with a criminal record, once indicted for securities fraud. Claire's grip tightened on the phone. "You're saying she's using Ethan?" "I'm saying," Logan replied, "if Ethan thought he was in control, he wasn't." A sharp pang twisted in Claire's chest. Was Ethan truly guilty, or had he been lured into something much bigger than himself? Her emotions warred between fury and reluctant sympathy. Could she have been so blinded by pain that she hadn't considered another possibility? The choice settled heavily in her mind. She needed to see for herself. That evening, she stepped into the Four Seasons, her black dress flowing over her growing belly. Logan was already there, waiting in the lobby. "She's with Castello," he murmured, subtly gesturing toward a secluded booth. Claire's breath caught as she spotted Vanessa, seated across from the man whose very presence reeked of danger. She slipped into a nearby booth, separated by a thin partition of frosted glass. The tension in the air was palpable. Then, Vanessa's voice drifted through, low, calculated. "He suspects nothing." Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. For a moment, she couldn't move, but as the weight of the betrayal settled, clarity replaced hesitation. She had come searching for answers. Now she had them. Claire sat frozen, her pulse thudding in her ears. Just beyond the frosted glass divider, Vanessa's voice dripped with urgency. "I've come too far to let Ethan slip away. He's the key to everything, Richard. If I don't close this deal, you know what happens." Richard Castello's reply was cold, detached. "You're drowning in debt. I warned you. If you fail, you're useless to me." Claire's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palm. Ethan was being used. A bitter laugh almost escaped her. But he let himself be used. He had walked straight into Vanessa's trap, traded his marriage for a deal he didn't even realize was a noose tightening around his neck. Logan gently touched her arm, steering her away as their conversation wrapped up. "You have your answer," he murmured as they exited the hotel. "She's manipulating him, but from the way she spoke, it's more than business." Claire inhaled sharply. The baby kicked, grounding her in the moment. This wasn't just about her pain, her broken marriage. It was about her child. She had to protect their future, no matter what. The next morning, Claire barely had time to process her emotions before the sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Ethan stepping out of his car, dressed in a sweater and slacks, a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. For the first time in weeks, he looked lost. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders weighed down by something heavier than exhaustion. She exhaled slowly. "Why are you here?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "I had to see you. I can't stand this. I can't stand how broken we are." His voice was hoarse. "I need to talk." Claire hesitated. Every part of her wanted to turn him away, but she stepped aside. "Come in." She led him to the sunroom, the waves crashing in the distance. Silence stretched between them before she finally whispered, "Why?" Ethan's throat bobbed. His eyes, red-rimmed, hesitant, met hers. "I swear I never planned for any of this." Claire's nails pressed into her palm. "But you let it happen." He swallowed hard. "I ended it. That night at the hotel, I told her we were done. She threatened me, Claire, said she'd ruin everything, sabotage deals, drag Whitmore name through a scandal." Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't know whether to believe him, or if this was just another beautifully crafted lie. Claire studied him, her gaze sharp, searching for the lies she was certain were there. But what she saw in Ethan's face made her chest tighten. Regret, fear, maybe even a flicker of something real. She exhaled slowly. "I know about Richard Costello," she said evenly. "I know what Vanessa's been planning." Ethan flinched, his throat bobbing. "How?" "A private investigator." Her voice didn't waver. "I needed the truth." A mix of relief and shame crossed Ethan's face. He ran a hand down his jaw, exhaling sharply. "I was too ashamed to tell you." His voice was raw. "She was blackmailing me, threatening to leak rumors, spin whatever story she needed to the press. I was trying to protect my reputation, the company, and ultimately, you." Claire's fingers curled against the fabric of her dress. "You were protecting me?" Her voice cracked. "You still chose her." Ethan's eyes burned. "I know, and I hate myself for it." The weight of his words pressed against her ribs. He sounded genuine. He looked broken. But was that enough? "I need to see real change," she said, forcing her voice to stay firm. "Cut ties with her. Publicly, make it impossible for her to manipulate you again." Ethan nodded, resolve tightening his jaw. "I will." Later that week, he made good on his promise. The meeting took place in Whitmore Enterprises' glass-walled boardroom. Claire watched from an adjoining office, Logan beside her, discreetly noting every detail. Vanessa arrived in a designer coat, every step measured, her expression unreadable. She greeted the board with polite smiles, but when she spotted Ethan, her eyes darkened with something colder. Ethan straightened. "Miss Sinclair, I've gathered our board to discuss the proposed partnership." He exhaled slowly. "After careful consideration, Whitmore Enterprises has decided to step away from any agreements with your firm." A slow, chilling silence filled the room. Vanessa's posture remained poised, but Claire saw her nails dig into the leather of her handbag. "I don't understand," she said smoothly. "We were on the verge of signing." Ethan folded his hands, keeping his voice steady. "It's no longer in the company's best interest." Vanessa's lips barely moved. And on a personal level, his gaze didn't waver. "It's over." A muscle in her jaw twitched, but she smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "I see." Claire didn't breathe until Vanessa walked out. Maybe Ethan was truly severing ties, or maybe Vanessa wasn't done yet. Claire's breath caught as she watched from behind the tinted glass. Ethan sat across from Vanessa in the boardroom, his posture rigid, his voice unwavering. "This is the end of our association. You won't be hearing from me again." For a moment, Vanessa's expression was unreadable. Then, a flicker of something dark, rage, desperation, crossed her gaze. "You'll regret this?" Her voice was cold, measured. "You think you can just erase me?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto his. "I have enough to destroy you. The tabloids will devour every dirty little detail I feed them." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Miss Sinclair, our legal team will be in touch regarding any remaining contractual matters." Vanessa didn't blink. "This isn't over." Her lips curled in a slow, deliberate smile. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Then, with a sharp turn on her heels, she strode out, the click of her designer heels echoing in the silence. From the adjacent office, Claire clenched her fists. The bridge had been burned, but the fire was still raging. Days later, the headlines erupted. Billionaire husband's secret affair, the explosive truth. Photos of Ethan and Vanessa at Vellagio, stepping into the Waldorf Astoria, even a blurry shot of them standing too close in a dimly lit hallway plastered every gossip site. A statement attributed to Vanessa painted her as the victim, a woman used and discarded by a ruthless businessman. She accused Ethan of manipulating her, of promising more than just a business deal before throwing her away. Claire felt sick as she scrolled through the endless speculation online. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Even Lucy Davenport, her closest friend and Ethan's PR director, sounded breathless over the chaos. "We can't contain this," Lucy admitted. "The press is running wild, investors are panicking, social media is a disaster." Claire rubbed her temple, exhaustion creeping in. The world was tearing Ethan apart, but in the chaos she saw something far worse brewing. They didn't know she was pregnant. Yet. And when they did, paparazzi would swarm like vultures, desperate to capture the betrayed, heavily pregnant wife of a billionaire. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Determined to shield herself, Claire withdrew from the public eye, limiting her movements, but the isolation didn't ease her turmoil. She wasn't just furious at Ethan. She wasn't just disgusted by Vanessa. She was terrified of what came next. The phone rang again. Claire let it vibrate against the table, staring at Ethan's name flashing across the screen. He called every day, leaving messages filled with apologies and desperation. He begged to see her, pleaded for them to present a united front to the public. He insisted that if they stood together, they could control the media storm. But Claire wasn't sure she could stand beside a man who had betrayed her. A sharp knock pulled her from her thoughts. She opened the door to find Lucy standing there, soaked from the rain, clutching a folder. Inside, over steaming cups of tea, Lucy spread the documents across the coffee table. "The fallout is massive," she admitted, voice tight. "Major investors are backing out. The board is divided. Some want to distance themselves. Others think Ethan is too valuable to lose." Claire's stomach twisted as she skimmed through the pages, graphs showing plummeting stock prices, emails from nervous investors, and worst of all, legal papers. "This," Lucy hesitated, then slid a document toward her. "This is from Vanessa's lawyers." Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. "She's suing Ethan for breach of contract, emotional distress, and defamation," Lucy continued, voice hushed. "She claims he manipulated her into a relationship just to secure her investment, then humiliated her by cutting her off publicly." Claire's fingers curled into her palms. Vanessa knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was a direct strike at Ethan's greatest weakness, his reputation. Lucy reached for her hands, squeezing gently. "I know you're hurting, and you have every right to be. But Claire, if Vanessa wins this, we lose everything." A lump formed in her throat. "What do you mean?" Lucy exhaled slowly. "Ethan's legal team is preparing a defense. But a personal statement from you, standing by him, could shift public opinion." Claire swallowed hard. "You want me to say I forgive him?" Lucy hesitated. "Even if you don't, even if it's just for optics, it might stop this from spiraling further." The request hit like a weight in her chest. Was she willing to stand beside the man who had broken her? To defend him in front of the world when she didn't even know if she wanted to stay married to him? Her heart twisted, torn between loyalty to the man she once loved and the pain he had caused. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded. "I'll attend the preliminary hearing." But deep down, she wasn't sure which side she was really on. Claire stepped out of the car, and the world erupted in a blinding frenzy of cameras and questions. Flash. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you standing by your billionaire husband?" Flash. "Claire, did Ethan cheat while you were pregnant?" The crush of reporters surged closer, and her pulse skyrocketed. She couldn't breathe. Ethan's hand rested lightly on her back, a silent anchor, guiding her inside. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean into his touch either. Inside, Vanessa sat with her legal team, draped in a sleek black designer dress that hugged every curve. She dabbed at her eyes dramatically, a perfect picture of wounded dignity. But when her gaze flickered to Claire, the softness vanished. The hearing unfolded in carefully measured legal jargon. Vanessa's lawyer accused Ethan of manipulating her for financial gain, exploiting her emotions to secure investments before discarding her publicly. Ethan's legal team countered, laying bare Vanessa's crumbling finances and history of extortion attempts. The tension thickened. The judge, weary of the media circus, issued a temporary gag order. No one was to leak details until the formal trial. But the damage had already been done. The moment Claire and Ethan stepped outside, the press pounced. Flash. Claire, are you leaving him? Flash. Ethan, is it true you promised Vanessa a future? Flash. How does this affect your unborn child? Claire gripped Ethan's arm tighter, her stomach twisting. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a headline. Inside the limo, her breath came in shallow waves. Ethan pulled her close, his voice low. I never wanted this for you. She closed her eyes, exhaustion sinking in. Apologies won't fix this. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Only your actions will. In the following weeks, Ethan tried to prove himself. He severed ties with questionable investors, delegated more power to his executives, and, most surprisingly, he stayed. He spent nights in the Hamptons, walking beside Claire on the beach, carrying her sandals when her feet ached, reading parenting books by the fireplace. She didn't let her guard down easily, but when he showed up unannounced at her 7th-month prenatal checkup, clutching a bouquet of pink roses, something in her cracked. For the first time in months, she let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. Ethan held Claire's hand through the ultrasound, his grip warm and steady. Their baby's heartbeat filled the room, a soft, rhythmic whoosh that silenced everything else. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. I love you, he whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. I love both of you. A single tear slipped down Claire's cheek. For the first time in months, she felt something fragile begin to mend, a glimmer of what they used to be. Then the world shattered again. Despite the judge's gag order, a salacious article surfaced on a lesser-known gossip blog. The headline was brutal. Billionaire husband's secret love child? Mistress claims she's pregnant. Within hours, the rumor went viral. International tabloids plastered it across their front pages. The accusation? Ethan had allegedly fathered Vanessa's child. Claire's breath turned shallow as she read the words over and over. Was her baby no longer his only heir? The room spun. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, rereading the claims like a masochist, unable to stop. Images of Ethan and Vanessa flashed through her mind. Hotel rooms, whispered conversations, broken trust. Could it be true? Her thoughts spiraled, but before she could process them, her phone rang. Ethan. Claire, it's a lie. His voice was frantic. She's lying to manipulate us. I haven't been with her in months. She's not pregnant with my child. I'd take a DNA test tomorrow if I have to. His words felt desperate, but trust had become a fragile foreign thing. She squeezed her eyes shut. She wanted to believe him, but how could she? Logan immediately launched an investigation, digging through financial records and tracking Vanessa's movements. Meanwhile, Lucy scrambled to release a statement discrediting the rumor, but the damage was done. The truth didn't matter. The scandal was too profitable, the lie too tempting for the press to ignore. That night, a storm raged over the Hamptons, thunder shaking the windows while rain lashed against the beach house. Claire sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring at her phone, the baby monitor strapped around her belly. Every flutter, every movement felt magnified. Then, pain. A sharp clench rippled through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She froze. A few moments later, another wave of pain hit, stronger this time. Her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Claire counted the seconds between the pain, her breath shallow. Too soon. This was too soon. Her doctor had warned her about the signs of preterm labor, but she hadn't wanted to believe it. Now, as another sharp contraction tightened around her belly, fear clawed at her throat. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she called Ethan. I think something's wrong, she gasped, pressing a hand to her abdomen. The baby. I need to go to the hospital. His voice sharpened. I'm on my way. But the storm outside had turned the city into a gridlocked nightmare. Claire's pulse pounded as she realized he wouldn't reach her in time. She called Lucy next, barely able to form the words. Within minutes, an ambulance was on its way. The ride to the hospital was brutal. The rain slammed against the windows, the sirens screaming above the storm. Each contraction felt like a vice, and for the first time she realized how alone she was. At the hospital, doctors rushed to stabilize her, administering medication to slow the contractions. Monitors beeped, voices overlapped, but all she could hear was the deafening uncertainty. Hours passed, and then finally, Ethan. He burst into the room, soaked to the bone, breathless, terrified. His eyes locked onto hers as he rushed to her side. "I'm here," he whispered, pressing a damp kiss to her forehead. "I'm not going anywhere." Claire let out a shaky breath, clinging to his hand. For just a second, she wanted to believe him. The doctors managed to halt the labor, but the warning was clear. She needed complete bed rest. Stress, they said, was the enemy now. Ethan took those words seriously. He shut down everything: business meetings, calls, even the ongoing media circus. None of it mattered. Instead, he stayed. He fetched water when she was too tired to move, read to her from parenting books in a low, soothing voice, and sat beside her bed as she drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. And somehow in those quiet moments, Claire felt the weight of all they had lost. "I feel like we lost ourselves somewhere," she murmured one morning, her fingers tracing the edge of the hospital blanket. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I know." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I'm so sorry for everything I put you through." Her throat burned. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can." The hum of hospital machines filled the silence between them. Claire sat propped against her pillows, eyes fixed on the rhythmic rise and fall of her stomach. The tension between them hadn't vanished, but for the first time in months, there was something fragile between them. An unspoken truce, built on the shared terror of almost losing their child. Then Logan arrived. He handed Ethan a folder, his expression unreadable. "She lied," he said simply. Claire's fingers tightened around the sheets as Ethan flipped through the evidence. A leaked medical report, insider testimony. Vanessa had never been pregnant. The claim was a desperate ploy, a final attempt to manipulate the media and the courts. Even Victor Lombardi, her longtime backer, had cut ties the moment her scheme unraveled. Relief flooded through Claire, but it was tainted by exhaustion and bitterness. "So this is what she does?" she murmured. "Weaves lies and illusions, plays men like pieces on a board." Ethan exhaled sharply. "I let this happen. I let her get close enough to destroy everything." Logan cleared his throat. "We also tracked her finances. She's drowning in debt, selling off properties across Europe, grasping for any way to stay afloat." Ethan's expression hardened. "She won't see a penny from me." A week later, Claire was discharged on strict bed rest, but she refused to watch the trial unfold from a distance. When the day arrived, the courthouse was a storm of cameras, reporters shouting questions. This time, Lucy had prepared. A private corridor allowed them to bypass the worst of it. Inside, Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table, draped in an immaculate white suit, a final attempt at playing the innocent victim. But the cracks in her facade were already showing. Ethan's legal team presented Logan's findings: medical proof disproving her pregnancy, financial records revealing her desperation, and leaked emails exposing her plan to trap Ethan into a settlement. With every new revelation, Vanessa's mask slipped further. She tried to defend herself, her voice high, shrill, but the evidence was insurmountable. Then, the final blow. A witness from her own circle confirmed that the entire scandal had been orchestrated. The courtroom fell silent. For the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. Claire exhaled, gripping Ethan's hand beneath the table. For months, she had felt like her world was unraveling, piece by piece. Now, finally, it was Vanessa's turn to fall. The gavel struck, sealing Vanessa's fate. Her lawsuit was dismissed. She sat motionless, her once impeccable poise cracking. The confident woman who had wielded power over headlines now looked small, insignificant. Ethan's lawyers weren't finished. They filed a countersuit: defamation, malicious intent. If she wanted to keep fighting, she'd be dragged through the same media circus she had created. For the first time, Vanessa looked afraid. She tried to approach Ethan, her lips parting in desperation, but security blocked her path. Then, her gaze found Claire. For a fleeting moment, Claire saw something unexpected. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but desperation. A woman whose lies had finally swallowed her whole. But whatever sympathy she might have felt vanished when she remembered the anguish, the betrayal, the night spent questioning her own worth. Vanessa had lost, and Claire had reclaimed herself. The tabloids moved on to fresher scandals, but Ethan's real battle wasn't in boardrooms or headlines. It was at home. He arranged a press conference, not to excuse himself, but to acknowledge his mistakes. He stood before flashing cameras, his voice steady. "I regret the personal turmoil that has affected this company, but my commitment to integrity remains unshaken." It was calculated, controlled, a masterful attempt at rebuilding his empire. But no statement, no public apology could fix what had been shattered between him and Claire. At night, he stayed by her side. He told her childhood stories, whispered his hopes for the future, and, most importantly, he answered every question. Sometimes she sobbed, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Other times, she lashed out, her voice sharp, cutting. Ethan never turned away, never told her to move on. He listened. Slowly, something fragile began to form between them. Not trust, not yet, but the willingness to try. He made small, quiet efforts, cooking her favorite meals, rubbing her aching feet, reading parenting books aloud in bed. And then, one evening, he mentioned therapy. Claire balked at the idea, recoiling. She wasn't ready to unpack the damage, the resentment, the love tangled with pain. But something about Ethan's expression, raw, open, unguarded, made her hesitate. So she agreed. And for the first time in months, it felt like they were taking a step forward. Claire hesitated at the doorway. The backyard had been transformed. Fairy lights wove between trees, candlelight flickered against the waves, and a soft melody hummed in the night air. Ethan stood near the table, smoothing his shirt, his nervous energy barely hidden beneath his usual confidence. Lucy nudged Claire forward. "Go." She stepped onto the sand, inhaling the salty breeze, feeling the weight of everything unspoken between them. Ethan pulled out her chair, his touch lingering on her back. They dined on fresh seafood, Claire sipping a doctor-approved mocktail, as conversation drifted not toward the chaos, but to the past. She laughed softly, remembering their first kiss, the way he had stumbled over his words before leaning in. "I was terrified you'd reject me," Ethan admitted, twirling his glass between his fingers. Claire studied him. "And now?" His gaze met hers, steady, unguarded. "Now I'm terrified of losing you." Under the moonlit sky, he extended a hand. "Dance with me?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, she rose, his arms wrapped around her, careful of the space between them, their child, their fragile love, their fractured trust. "I'm still scared," she whispered. Ethan's grip tightened. "I can't promise perfection, but I promise honesty. I promise to fight for us." She closed her eyes, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. And for the first time, hope didn't feel so impossible. A month later, when Claire's contractions began, there was no panic, just a quiet resolve. The labor came steadily, like a chapter reaching its final pages. Ethan rushed her to the hospital, Lucy and Logan waiting in the wings, their closest friends standing by. The hours blurred, pain, exhaustion, whispered reassurances. And then, as dawn broke over Manhattan, the room filled with the softest sound, a newborn's cry. A nurse placed a tiny bundle in Claire's arms, pink cheeks, delicate fingers curling into a fist. The smallest, most perfect human. Tears slipped down Claire's face as she stared at their daughter. Ethan leaned over, brushing damp hair from her forehead, his voice raw. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." Claire looked up, the weight of everything they had endured settling between them. Maybe love wasn't perfect, maybe trust took time. But in this moment, holding their daughter, she knew they had something worth fighting for. Ethan gently tucked a strand of Claire's hair behind her ear before placing a soft kiss on her forehead. "She's perfect, just like you." Claire let out a shaky breath as she looked at their newborn daughter. Her heart, once broken and wounded by betrayal, slowly started to heal as she traced her fingers over the baby's tiny hands. They named her Aurora Elizabeth Whitmore, a name that meant a new beginning, the light after the darkest night. As the weeks passed, the world moved on. The media found new scandals, and the storm that nearly destroyed them became just another headline of the past. Vanessa disappeared from the spotlight, drowning in legal troubles of her own. But Claire knew that while scandals faded quickly, trust took time to rebuild. She and Ethan gave a carefully planned interview, talking about charity work, family, and the lessons they learned from their mistakes. They never mentioned Vanessa. They didn't need to. The world saw a couple who had been tested, but not broken. But behind the cameras, healing wasn't that simple. Some nights, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering everything. The pain, the betrayal, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers. Some days, a passing stranger's cologne would send her back to that painful time. She wondered if she could ever trust Ethan again. But every morning, she woke up to see him rocking their daughter in his arms, singing lullabies in a voice filled with love. She saw the change in him. He no longer took their marriage for granted. He no longer gave empty apologies. Now he spent every day proving that Claire and Aurora were the only ones who mattered. And then Ethan did something Claire never expected. One evening, he took her to the beach. The sky was painted with warm orange and pink as the sun began to set. In front of them stood a small wooden house, its windows open to the ocean breeze. Ethan took her hand, his eyes filled with hope. "I bought this for us, a new beginning." Claire looked at the small sign on the door. Aurora House, where new beginnings are made. Tears filled her eyes. Ethan didn't just say sorry, he showed her he was ready to build a new future with her. She turned to him, her voice breaking with emotion. She didn't need to say anything, she just nodded. And for the first time in months, Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. They had lost each other once, but this time they would never let go again. "My dear friend, so we've just come to the end of this story. Maybe you feel conflicted. Maybe there are different perspectives, different emotions swirling inside you right now. But no matter where you stand, this story has left us with something to reflect on. Perhaps for some, it touched the deepest wounds of a woman's heart. The sting of betrayal, the weight of forgiveness. For others, it may have been a wake-up call, a reminder of what it means to be a husband, a wife, or simply a person trying to love and be loved in this unpredictable world. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you focus on freedom and live with kindness, simplicity, and integrity, you will find clarity. You will keep your mind unclouded by the noise of the world, letting go of what you cannot control, understanding the fleeting nature of material things, and focusing instead on what is eternal." At this very moment, within us, a battle is happening. Our immune system fights against invisible invaders. Our hearts beat tirelessly, sustaining life. Yet we rarely stop to appreciate it. On a psychological level, we are in a crisis. Addiction, anxiety, depression, loneliness, a silent war raging within modern society. At a cultural level, we see division, political unrest, collapsing empires, protests, environmental destruction, and declining birth rates. But at a cosmic level, the Earth keeps spinning. The planets continue their perfect orbit, unaffected by the chaos below. It's all perspective. When a giant redwood tree falls in a forest, some might call it a tragedy, but its fall allows sunlight to reach the forest floor, giving space for new life to grow. Everything is part of a greater order. Everything serves a purpose, even if we do not yet understand it. Confucius once wrote, "Everything has beauty, but not everyone sees it." When you detach yourself from outcomes, you begin to see the invisible thread that connects the smallest details of life to the vast, incomprehensible universe. You will find beauty in the cracks, in the imperfections, in the way nature moves effortlessly through cycles of creation and destruction. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this deeply. He saw that every hardship, every struggle, was not a punishment, but a lesson, a force shaping him into something stronger. "Why do you see misfortune in an event rather than fortune in your ability to endure it?" he asked. "Love the hand that fate deals you and play it as your own." And if you're still here, still listening, still thinking about this story, it means something within you has been touched. Maybe it's a small shift in perspective. Maybe it's a quiet understanding that pain is not the end of the story. Maybe, just maybe, it's the realization that even after the storm, the sun always rises. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel something, please don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the beauty in our struggles, the strength in our scars, and the hope that refuses to die. And remember, when you put kindness into the world, the universe has a way of bringing it back to you. Trust me.